So North Pennines National Landscapes, there's 38 of them in England and Wales. They were set up due to the 1949 National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act. We have the same quality and legal protection as national parks. However, the governance and the funding for national landscapes is very different. We're funded by DEFRA and get support from local authorities. Rebecca, can you change over to the next one?
Sorry.
And we're almost about 2,000 kilometres square across the North Pennines. So we're the second largest national landscape of the National Landscapes family. We cover County Durham, Cumbria, Northumberland and a little bit of Yorkshire. We were designated...
Oh, sorry.
It's all going wrong quickly. We're designated in 1978 but confirmed in 1988. And we're the second largest, as I said, after the Cotswolds, which is the largest. There you go, Rebecca. So the focus that we have is on nature recovery and also engaging people with nature and heritage, and we're guided by our management plan that's for every 4 years. So these are the ones that we're going to scoop through really quick, Rebecca. So I'm just going to give you a flavour of some of the reasons why the North Pennines National Landscape is important. So 36% of the AONB designated area is designated as sites of special scientific interest. 30% of the upland heathland has a home in the North Pennines. We have 27% of England's blanket bog, 40% of the upland hay meadows, 80% of the black grouse, which I always find unbelievable because I seem to see most of them. We have England's highest waterfall, rare Arctic alpine plants. We are home to red squirrels and otters, and a hotspot for breeding wading birds as well. And, which is why we're here today, we also have 2,000 years of mining history. We have dark sky status, and we have 16 dark sky discovery sites across the North Pennines. We're a UNESCO Global Geopark as well. And this is why we do what we do. So the kind of columns on the left, we want our natural and cultural heritage to thrive. So we want to conserve and enhance that heritage of the North Pennines and making sure that we can meet the needs for the future. We want people to enjoy and understand and care for nature and culture, and we do that through promoting public understanding and enjoyment, and encouraging people not to be just a participant, but also to actually actively engage with the conservation as well. We want to sustain benefits that our natural capital and cultural heritage bring to society. So that's around promoting the benefits, including clean air, water, food, carbon storage and other services vital to the nation's health and well-being. And we want to create an economy that respects nature and sustains local communities. So that's looking at the economic and social well-being of local communities and how we contribute to the conservation and enhancement of the natural beauty of the North Pennines. These are our top 10 conservation I need to put my teeth in this morning. Priorities: peatland and other soils, species-rich grassland, native mixed woodland and scrub, rivers and riparian habitat, breeding and wading birds, specific species conservation including raptors, Arctic alpine flora, dark night skies, archaeological sites and features, historical buildings and structures with a focus specifically on the mining heritage of the North Pennines. So this next very quick section is just some of the projects that will show you what we have been doing over the last 10 years. We have restored 40,000 hectares of peatland, which is approximately, if you're like me and you can't visualise what 40,000 hectares looks like, about 3.5 times the size of Newcastle, and saved 2.5 of carbon. We've been restoring species-rich grassland, and we do these through projects, which I'll talk about very soon. We do a lot of engagement with the farming community and champion high nature value farming. And we've done projects around tests and trials and facilitation funds as well. Lots of hay meadow interpretation, education and engagement through projects such as Tees Swale. Wild Watch and Cold Blooded and Spineless were two projects that we did that were looking at specific species. And Tees Swale Naturally Connected is the project that covers Teesdale and into Swaledale, and they have a number of activities around removing metals from mine waters and spoil heaps, working with farmers and supporting farmers, and a number of hay meadow projects as well. So there's a huge variety of different projects that they do, lots of engagement with schools and community groups as well. We also undertake Weardale natural flood management as well, so looking at how we can help control the flooding around certain areas. We've created and sustained the UNESCO Global Geopark as well. Bowleys has had over 400,000 visitors in the last 10 years. We've got over 70 interpreted trails and other interpretation projects across the Pennines. We've created the Dark Skies Discovery Sites and the Stargazing Festivals, of which went very successfully a couple of weeks ago. A range of communications, so you can keep in touch with us through the newsletters that we send out or through the website. We provide traineeships across all of our projects as well, so that we're creating entry-level job roles across all of the different projects that we have on board, and often those job roles will lead to employment in larger teams as well. And we have over 300 active volunteers. So we also look at the historic environment, and some of the projects that we've done with that have been Altogether Archaeology and LIDAR and Awesome North Pennines. Excuse me. Also Living North Pennines, Allen Valley's Landscape Partnership Scheme and the Fellfoot Forward Partnership Scheme also had aspects of the historic environment in it. So going on to the project that we're going to just tell you about now. I'll go on to the next slide, Rebecca. I'm just going to give you a bit of a background to where we came from. So we've talked about the previous projects. We are supported actively and very dynamically by both the Historic Environment Working Group and the Advisory Group. So where the project came from was some of the previous projects had noted that the lead mining heritage is now of an age where it's requiring work. The problem is that it isn't of any economic benefit to landowners. The land can't be reused. It's not like a big cotton mill in Manchester where you can make them into swanky flats. Not many people want to live as a hobbit down a mine. I'm sure there might be some people, but not everybody wants to do that. And also the area surrounding them is often toxic as well. So it does have some issues, and the reuse is impossible in most cases. So the idea came up around looking at protecting some of those key sites that we identified across the North Pennines that were important to tell the story or were important to the heritage of the lead mining across the Pennines. So the Historic Environment Working Group set up an advisory group for the project, and they went out and they surveyed a number of sites and went around them to determine what level of support, if any, they needed. So they looked at whether they needed consolidation and whether they were the most important, the best example, etc. We looked at access issues to that, we looked at interpretation, and then a shortlist was drawn up from that, which was then worked on when we came to the development year. So at that point, an expression of interest was put in by the North Pennines team to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. But that was an expression of interest, and you would only get a very short amount of words to do that in and explain the project. But then, of course, COVID came along and it had to be resubmitted after COVID. And at that point, it was resubmitted in April 2022. And by October 2022, I was recruited, and then Rebecca was recruited. Next slide, please, Rebecca. So this is just a quick map of some of the veins that are across the North Pennines to give you an idea of the scale and size of the mining all those little lines that you can see, the cross-hatching everywhere, they're all veins that have been mapped out and shows you right across the North Pennines zone what you can see. So it's quite an extensive industry. Next slide, please, Rebecca. And this slide shows the buildings that remain in the North Pennines that we know of. It is changing all the time, but that gives you an idea of the clusters of where they are, where the key mining areas were, and how many bits of heritage the Historic Environment Working Group and Advisory Group actually went out and surveyed and had a look at. Thanks, Rebecca. So during the development year, when myself and Rebecca started working together, we had 8 months that we needed to pull together a full funding bid to go into the National Lottery Heritage Fund. For anybody who doesn't know the process with the National Lottery Heritage Fund, you start off with an expression of interest. If they like the sound of it, they will ask you to go ahead and ask you how much money you want to develop the plan, and then they set you away with that. So that's when myself and Rebecca came on board, and we started looking at the areas that we needed to do. So the 4 main aims of the project were to conserve and record the most important mining heritage, looking at access and interpretation for the sites that tell the story of lead mining and developing new audiences for the North Pennines mining heritage, and volunteering to build capacity to safeguard mining heritage for the future. So Rebecca, do you want to do this slide? Because you like this one.
I can do, thanks Andy. Yeah, so we had a very successful development year, which actually, because of changing funding submission deadlines, ended up being a development 8 months. But in that time, we were very busy and managed to squeeze in 50 engagement events. Between our engagement events and our volunteer activities, we had 994 people join in. The volunteers contributed 679 volunteer hours and they attended 6 volunteer training events. We surveyed people as we went through, and 20% of participants said they had no previous interest in lead mining heritage. And at the end of the event, 73% were more interested in the lead mining heritage following our activities. So really, really successful in terms of getting more people interested in that really important history of the area. And we also had 8 conservation plans written for doing some works to historic structures that Andy will tell you a little bit more about. There we go.
I was just about to take a sip of tea there.
Sorry.
So we've mentioned about the funding bid. So the main funding bid for 2.1, just short of £2.1 million went to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. We've also secured funding from other organisations such as Historic England that support the salaries of the staff, and also through DEFRA, through Farming in Protected Landscapes and the Rural England Prosperity Fund. So what the funding from DEFRA is looking at is some of the buildings that we are doing consolidation work on, and I won't steal Gary's thunder and mention very much about them because he's going to talk to you about those later. We've created a volunteer hub and resource centre in Stanhope, where we have some books and information and equipment for volunteers to come and access. We've been very busy undertaking procurement for the contractor, who is Gary Simpson, who is Heritage Consolidation Limited, and he is completing the complete project. So all 8 structures that we're undertaking work on, Gary will be doing that work across 3 years of the contract. We've got an interpretation brief live at the moment, so we will be working with some professionals to do some interpretation on sites that we've identified during the development period. And just about to go live is a community archaeology brief that will go out to support us with doing some of our activities that Rebecca will tell you about. I seem to spend all my time saying somebody else is going to tell you about these later. And then also about to go live is a brief for oral history and podcasting as well to support the programme that we drew up. So talking about consolidation, I will very briefly go through some of the sites, but like I say, I'm not going to steal Gary's thunder, so I'm just going to name the sites and where they are. So we have in the very bottom of the Pennines, right on the A66, we have Orgill. Orgill is a lead and iron ore smelting mill. in a very perilous stage. I will show you a photograph of that in a minute. I'm sure Gary has got much better photographs. It's roofless. It stands on the edge of a triple SI, and it also stands within a piece of ground that is can't remember what the word is now, is a park that people will go into for landscapes. So I'll come across the word eventually at some point. Further north, but also in Cumbria, we have Nenthead Mines. We've got some engine bases. In the 1990s, there were the archaeologists went in and cleared all the rubble off that because the smelt mill had been demolished on top of it. Those engine bases are made out of very early concrete, and unfortunately, as we know, the weather has a way of doing what it wants to do, and it's deteriorating those. So we're actually going to cover those back up and make some interpretation there to describe what's there, because the weather has been playing havoc with them. Then going over into Northumberland, we have got Allendale Smelting Mill. As part of a previous project that I mentioned earlier, the Allen Valleys project, there was a community archaeology project went on at Allen Mills, and they uncovered they uncovered a wheel pit, some flooring, and a reverberatory furnace that actually sit outside of the scheduling. And that has been, the reverberatory furnace has been sat underneath a tarpaulin since 2015. So that's another one of the things we're going to consolidate. As part of Allendale Smelting Mill, the same schedule also has the flues that run up to Flow Moss from Allendale. Apparently it's the longest double section of flues in the country. And there is one section that is a really good remaining example, Frollo Meadows. And unfortunately, they were starting to deteriorate. For some reason, when they built the flues, they punched holes through afterwards. Whether that was for access, I don't think it was for access because it's quite small, but we were wondering whether it was something to do with drawing, because we think they had two flues so that the mill could work continuously, and then we'd just alternate flues to use it. So maybe when they were cleaning it out and it stopped the fumes going up that flue, maybe it was to get the draw back up, because they did have pads on top of it. But again, Gary is going to show you much better photographs than my description. But unfortunately, because they'd been punched in afterwards, they were causing problems, because we found out that the flues, were actually dry stone walled. They weren't mortared at all. We assumed they were mortared, and some of these are up to 12 foot high. So what was happening is the farmer was losing some of his cows down them, which was what his concerns were. And what we wanted to do was try and help consolidate the flues and secure them for the future. So that meant that some parts of the work were demolishing bits that were twisting the flues. But again, Gary will tell you much, much more about that. We also are looking at Allen Head's ore floor. There's lots of work to be done there around revetments, and the riverbeds there that are all cobbled, they're starting to lift, and we're going to do some work around that. Holmeslyn in Northumberland, we're looking at the engine house, so it's still in Northumberland there. And then dropping into County Durham, we're looking at a very unusual mine shop at Coldbury. Well, not an unusual mine shop, sorry. It's a black powder house, but originally it was the first mine shop there. So it's the only black powder house that has a chimney in it. It's in a very poor state and is currently, well, two walls are falling down quite rapidly. So those are going to be rebuilt back up to roof height. And then Middleup Shield in County Durham above Slipwood at Westgate, where we are consolidating the walls. With all of this work, the work that we're doing is very light touch. It's about stabilising. It's not about building back up potentially. It's not about making it look like it did in its heyday. It's about making sure that it's solid and secure for at least the next 50 years. So that's the work that Gary is going to be doing, and we'll tell you more about Orgill, Middleup Shield and Frollo Meadows later on. So here's just some quick pictures. This is Frollo Meadows. This is a section of one of the flues, and you can see at the bottom left the problems that we were showing. What they've done is they've built a trench along the field and built walls into it, and then used a former to build the arches, which was great and very solid, and then they turfed over the top. But then when they've punched these extra bits in, it's created a weakness where the keystone is, and has made some of the flues start twisting and also collapsing as well around those punched through holes. So we'll move on to the next one, Rebecca. This is Middle Up Shield. This is actually a picture afterwards because I thought it was just a nice sunny day. I thought we'll revel in that sun if we haven't got it ourselves. Again, the work here was to consolidate and make sense of what was there so that it's more easily readable, and then make sure that it was more secure. So that's above Slipwoods in Westgate. And this is Orgill. Every photograph I've taken of this, I've managed to make look straight. So Gary has better photographs that he'll show you. Orgill is the smelting, the lead and iron ore smelting mill near the A66. So also we're doing access and interpretation. Like I said before, we have got a programme of interpretation from new interpretation on some sites. So that will be panels. Also, we're looking at replacing some of the worn out or faded or illegible panels that are existing around lead mining across the North Pennines. We've got a programme of cleaning them as well. And we're also looking at doing lots of interpretation online. The North Pennines National Landscape are looking at, they're putting together a new website at the moment with a map on that you can geolocate things, so people will be able to go in and light touch look at things that's on the ground, such as the interpretation, or they can deep dive into some things like letters that are stored on the Dukesfield Documents website that might tell you about life in Allen Heads at that time, say for instance. So we've got lots of different ways of interpreting the lead mining heritage, and the idea being that we'll put all of those resources online through research where we've found books, where you can find the interpretation panels at, etc. Also with access, we're starting off with Middle Up Shield 2 weeks time, looking at access paths that are impassable or need a little bit of improvement, or stiles are needed, or benches are needed in some cases, and that work is just starting to kick off and will continue throughout the 3 years of the programme that are remaining.
Thanks, Andy.
And I'll pass over to Rebecca now.
Sorry, I realised halfway through that we've been very remiss and didn't do introductions. So that was Andy Harris, our project manager for the Land of Lead and Silver. And my name is Rebecca Cadbury-Simmons, and I am Interpretation and Engagement Officer for the Land of Lead and Silver project. So as Andy said, one of our key aims is to develop new audiences for the lead mining heritage. And so we've been doing this in a whole manner of ways. We've been trying to make things as accessible as possible. We've been trying to approach heritage in a different way. And one of the ways that we've done that is through quite an extensive arts programme. We wanted to do an arts programme as part of this project because we found during the development year that people who aren't necessarily drawn to events that are focused on history and heritage are quite sometimes drawn to arts, and it offers a much more varied scheme of activities. But also there's quite a history when you look at the miners who were creating these spar boxes. There's quite a history of the miners creating art themselves. So if you've been to Killip Lead Mining Museum, you'll recognise these spar boxes. It's where when in the height of industry, when the miners were searching for lead, they were also coming across fluorospar that they didn't need. They called it Bonnie bits. And instead of just getting rid of them, as like disposing of them as they were told to, they created these beautiful structures and put them in these very ornate boxes and display cabinets, and then sold them for a lot of money. And it made it was an extra way for them to make income, basically, when because they were paid on delivery of lead. So when they were on a less good vein, it was just an extra way to make some money. But I really love the dichotomy of hardy northern miners making sparkly boxes for an extra bit of money. But so our arts programme consists of two key elements. One is an artist in residence, and the other is community arts bursaries. I'll tell you about our residents first. We had our first resident artist in residence this year. Her name is Abby Baker, and she's a ceramicist who was based in Teesdale, although her family is based on Alston Moor. And she led a series of workshops where people were making all kinds of ceramic imitations of different things to do with lead mining in the landscape. As you can see in that bottom right picture, we've got a little mine cart and a mine entrance and some tools, but also the flowers. She was very inspired by the specific flowers and plants that we get up here because of the lead mining industry, so all those metalliferous and lead tolerant plants. So she was looking at it from a broad landscape perspective and how that industry has shaped so much of what we know and love about the North Pennines. And during this residency, it was 3 months long, and we wish it could have been longer because she was absolutely brilliant. She discovered that her grandmother had been a quilt maker in Alston, and she wanted to incorporate that into her final piece as well. So you can see that picture on the left where she stood next to her final piece. The background of it is all quilted. And she learned how to do that through this residency. And then she incorporated all those little ceramic pieces once she'd painted and glazed them, all the pieces that people had made, and incorporated that into it. And we are hoping that this piece will be able to go on display in Alston Town Hall through Alston Historical Society at some point. So watch this space. But yeah, so Abby was absolutely fantastic. And then we had our community arts bursaries. And so the difference between the residency and the bursaries is the residency really focuses on the development of the artist's skills, and it gives them that freedom to work on any element of their craft. It could be their engagement skills or wanting to try a different medium, whereas the community arts bursaries are for any artist who has an idea of a project they might want to do that links to the lead mining heritage in some way, and as long as there's like heavy community involvement in that, then we're all for it. So we gave out four arts bursaries this year. The first was to Anna Osborne, who made these amazing felted geodes. She ran like 14 workshops over the summer for people of all different ages, and made felted geodes. And then whilst the geodes were felting, she had this ingenious idea of putting them into a tumble dryer so they were felted automatically. While they were felting, we got people doing needle felting as well, and she made a lovely wall hanging, which we're hoping is going to go on display in St Thomas's Church Hall in Stanhope. And then we had Carol, who works at Killip, so is very interested in the lead mining heritage, and she found a picture of lead smelters at Rookup who had knitted these shawls and head coverings to protect them not just from the heat of the smelter but also from the cold drafts that were coming in to get air into the smelter as well. And so she wanted to recreate this, so she went out and talked to community groups across the North Pennines and gave people patterns. There were 3 different skill levels available, one for very beginners who've never knitted before, all the way up to quite accomplished knitters. And there were all different colours of wool available, and people basically recreated. The picture at the bottom there is just some of the shawls that were knitted as part of this project, and you can see like the absolute variety. And Carol's husband, bless him, modelling one on the right hand side there, doing a fantastic job. So it was a great project, and really got people to feel like what it was like for the smelters in Rookup. And we did a final event in that project where we processed from Rookup Village out to Rookup Arch, which if you've been there, you know the arch used to be part of the smelt mill, and we took some photos there. And I didn't include it in this because I had the physical picture on display in the village hall. I'm sorry. But yeah, we processed and recreated that picture, so it was a really fantastic project. And then we worked with Daniel Weatheritt, who is a graphic designer, and he led a project helping people to create these sort of postcard inspired images, and it was looking at, again, the landscape and industry and how those two interact, and getting people to create these postcard pictures. And then he created a frame. We had an exhibition at Bowlees at the end of the arts programme displaying all the artwork, and he created a frame and then had a rolling display going through the frame, and it was sort of an homage to the spar boxes as well. So he worked with Nunhead and Alston primary schools and also with groups of adults to create these really beautiful pictures. And finally, we have Leanne Bain, who she led a course on rag rugging, which is a traditional craft in the North Pennines. It's what the miners and their families would have been using up all their old textiles for to help keep the house warm. And so she led a 6-week course on this for people to create any designs that are inspired by the lead mining industry or the landscape that's been shaped by it. So we've got an old, in that picture where Leanne stood next to the hanging ones, we've got an old mine shop, which is the miners' accommodation. And then the one to the right of that, on the top right, is a bit more abstract. That's looking at the stratigraphy and the layers of the geology. Then we've got obviously a sheep, very common. A lot of the miners were minor farmers, and so they would have been keeping some animals as well. And on the bottom right there, we've got the killip wheel. So some like a great array of designs there. And we're going to be launching our 2025 arts programme in January. So keep your eyes peeled on our website. If you're an artist or you know anyone who's an artist, please do share this opportunity with them, because we'd love to hear from you. So we also do Saturday strolls, which are monthly guided walks that are up to 3 miles in length. We try to keep them as slow and as gentle as possible, so they tend to be on where we can find them flat, well, like paved footpaths. It's not always the easiest to achieve that goal in the North Pennines, but we try where we can. And they're always through lead mining landscapes. They move around each month. So if you enjoy getting out for a slow walk where we encourage you to take time and really look at the landscape, then these walks might be for you. We also did a Festival of Archaeology event. This is a national festival that happens every year. We did an animation workshop weekend where Robin Webb, who's the guy in the orange t-shirt there, he was working with people to create short animations inspired by the lead mining industry. I do have the final video here, but we're running a bit short on time, so I'll just put that on to show you guys at the break, and it'll be running in the background. Oh, gonna start. We also did a mini touring exhibition for Heritage Open Days called Led by Fashion, and this was looking at the clothing and textiles of the North Pennines mining communities, and we visited Alston, Brampton, Allendale, Stanhope and Dufton with this exhibition, and we had a really good turnout, and people got the chance to print their own tote bags at that event as well. And then for North Pennines Stargazing Festival, we held a lantern making workshop in Nenthead. We actually held 2 because the first one sold out within a couple of days, so we put on a second one. So people got to make their own paper lantern using autumn leaves, and then we processed in the dark through Nenthead up to the mine site and went on a nighttime mine tour, and that was just a totally different event for us, but it was absolutely amazing. So Andy and I went to the annual conference of the National Association of Mining History Organisations, where it was held down in Cornwall this year. So we visited some of the tin mines down in Cornwall, some of the tin mining museums, learned about how they're doing engagement, how they're getting people engaged with the mining history, and also talked to a lot of people about what we're doing up in the North Pennines, so spreading the awareness of the project and the North Pennines overall. We have a community grant scheme for any community groups and organisations that want to do their own project relating to the lead and silver mining heritage. We've given out 3 grants already this year. We gave one to North Pennines playwrights who were writing a play all about the Allen Heads miners' strike in 1849. And we gave one to Weardale Museum, and we gave one to UTAS in Middleton and Teesdale, which is the Upper Teesdale Agricultural Support Services, and they're doing a chat and craft group who are exploring the theme of lead and silver mining at the moment. All the information is on our website. If you think, I've got a project and I'm looking for a bit of money, just have a chat with us. We're always looking for more community groups and projects to support with that. So We've been building plans for an event called Nenthead 200, which when we were researching this project, we found out that next year, 2025, will be the 200th anniversary of the London-led company planning Nenthead as a village. There were like small holdings and settlements before, but it really became a planned village from 1825 onwards. So we're wanting to do a big celebration event for that. We're also working on, we have submitted, an application to start a children's archaeology club on Alston Moor. So we're hoping that that will be able to get up and running in the new year. Andy, do you want to say anything quickly about the schools programme?
Yeah, can do. We've also started the Heritage Heroes Schools programme this year. We're running it with 6 schools, 3 primary, 3 secondary groups. We're working with 2 groups from Samuel King's, they're both year 8s, and also with a group at a school called Woodlands near Consett. And then we're working with Nenthead Primary, Frostley Primary and Longmartin Primary over in Cumbria as well. So they're kind of trialling the programme, but there are 6 modules to it. The first one is around geology, the next one is around lead mining, the following one is around social history, and then we're looking at the lives of the miners, so education, traditions, silver bands, cricket clubs, etc. Then they're looking at local traditions, folklore, and then onto metalliferous plants, so understanding what plants will grow on the sites now. And then the final module is looking at the impact of extractive industries on their areas. Every school, originally I wrote it to look at kind of key stage 2 to key stage 3, so that's kind of like the final years of primary and the earlier years of the secondary schools. However, every school is approaching it differently, and we have everything from early years through to key stage 4, which is GCSE level, and they're taking from that what they want. So they've done their geology module at the moment, and then they will go on to move on to the next module next term. We have put a number and a variety of different activities in, and we have been surprised that some of the activities we put in for some of the younger children, actually the older children enjoy them still as well. So things like the pet rocks that you can see at the bottom with the googly eyes on. Naomi's absolutely fabulous. As you can see in that tray on the right hand photograph, she has a pet rock collection, but these are the rocks of the North Pennines, and she uses those to be able to get the young people to actually have a look at them, feel what they feel like, are they heavy, are they light, etc. So we have a handling collection of rocks, and they will pull together the work that they've done over the whole year. It'll be assessed by a group of judges, and then we'll have an awards ceremony at the end of the academic year as well.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, we've got a lot of volunteering opportunities. I won't say much about the photogrammetry because we've got 2 of our own volunteers who are going to be talking about that very soon, and we're running quite tight on time. We've also been doing some condition assessments, so this is training people in how to do quite a simple look at the mining sites and be able to alert us and Historic England to if there's any issues with the sites that we should be worried about. We've also done some workshops on QGIS, which is a digital mapping software, how you can do historic research from home, what kind of free online resources are there available. We've also just done a workshop on what local collections of information there are. So we're doing all kinds of training for volunteers. And we've got some more workshops coming up before the end of the year. We have an intro to photogrammetry workshop on the 7th of December. On the 12th of December, we're looking at using archives for creative inspiration. We've got a volunteer Christmas catch-up on the 17th of December, a final Saturday stroll for the year on the 28th of December, which we hope is going to be around Hood Soap. I struggle to say that word, sorry. And then our first one of the new year will be a visit to Carlisle Archives on Tuesday, the 21st of January. But there's loads more coming next year. So if any of that sounds like it's up your street, or even if none of it does, but you just want to see what we're up to next year in case something new does tickle your fancy, then yeah, please keep an eye on our website. All of the information's on there. Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm so sorry we've eaten into 5 minutes of your time.
Don't you worry, Rebecca. I will aim to make it up by speeding up, because I don't want them, I
Sorry,
don't
really
want them to
quickly.
miss their tea break.
Ron's had a question about disabled access at sites, which we will come on to questions at the break time, if that's okay, Ron, just to try and stick to timings a little bit, but we will answer that question. We're not ignoring it. So yes, Kevin, over to you.
Okay, thanks. Are you're looking after the slides, Rebecca? Yeah. Yep. Good. Okay.
Sorry, I've muted my microphone. Yes, I've got your slides.
Good. Okay. So the title's called Photogrammetry in the Land of Lead and Silver, and it's a new angle. And my name's Kevin Smith, and I'm one of the volunteers working on this really good project. Could I have the next slide, please, Rebecca? Okay. So talk outline. So a little bit about my background. Okay. Introduction to photogrammetry. Not going to go into any super technical details here, for a couple of reasons. One, it's not that interesting, and two, it's boring. No, I didn't say that. But what I wanted to emphasize is basically how it works, how you can use it. And actually photogrammetry can sound to be a very esoteric, difficult technology, but actually nowadays it's fairly approachable. So, you know, don't be scared. Some examples of some of the 3D models. Just go through some of those. One of the things I wanted to just touch on was actually something quite advanced that we've been doing over at Nented Mines, through contacts through Nented Mines and Peter Jackson with Cumbria University. And it's a trial of some 3D cloud comparison technology, Cloud Compare, which is very promising basically for monitoring the status and the change of the aspects of the historic monuments, or whatever you want to look at. And then just a quick summary. Yeah, thank you. The next one. Okay, so what's photogrammetry? As I say, no boring technical details here. Basically, for photogrammetry, it uses photographs to create 3D models of physical objects and environments. Okay, and it involves a number of processes. There's like a workflow to it. Okay. So you have to take images and you have to look at them and sort of prepare them. Usually that's straightforward. It's just kind of looking that they're good photographs. You then start to use that can be done with a whole bunch of different photograph technology. And to be honest, when I started this about a year ago, I didn't have a lot of experience, you know, with photography, or certainly not photogrammetry. I knew the concept. But at the end of the day, you've got to take some good photographs that you then feed into some clever software. In the case that we're talking about here, tend to use a commercially available piece of software, which is not too expensive. It basically, you put the photographs in, it aligns them, and then you can start to use the software to build a 3D model, or sometimes referred to as point clouds. And then from the point cloud, you can add sort of a mesh and texture to the model. And it's amazing that with relatively simple technology and experience, you can get some very good quality models. And photogrammetry is a great thing. It's not just kind of used as kind of esoteric things. It's basically used in topographic mapping and surveys, architecture, engineering. It's almost like it's a really good skill to have across a number of industries, actually. You notice on this slide, basically, I've got a couple of pictures. It's when the volunteer team was up at Allen Mills. I think it was actually the first training session, actually. And actually, these two pictures here reflecting the first models that I actually had a go at, and I was using just a DLSR for these, and then bringing in software to actually to create a 3D model. And they are basically the entrance flues, the top one, and then there's a model of the Bingsteads at Allen Mills. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the approach for me, that I personalized all that learning to how how it works for me. And my kind of overriding thing is keep it simple. You know, you can make these technologies more and more complicated. You can involve all sorts of things, but actually it's amazing what you can do with simple technology, simple mobile phones even. So you can use a mobile phone, you can use a standard camera. You then have to experience how the software works for the aligning and building the models. But I used actually I didn't have a DLSR for a long time, and so I used my mobile phone, and I actually did a really cool little model with about 50 images of if you click on that, Rebecca, you can hopefully it'll take us there. You can see this little model that was just taken with a mobile phone. This is uploaded to Sketchfab. It takes a little while to get the full detail. But if you have a look at the top, if you have a look inside, you can see the detail of the rocks and things like that. So that's just using a mobile phone. You know, that's the thing. The writing is pretty good as well. So you can go a long way with a little. What I would also say is that with photogrammetry, it can be very technical, and it can lead to very detailed photogrammetric measurements, which is what you're trying to get to ultimately with photogrammetry. And you can start with something simple, but you've got something that allows you to grow. So you can get into drones, you can get into all sorts of sophisticated software. For example, like the cloud comparison software that I'll talk a bit about later. But actually you can do a lot with a little. That's my impression. Next one, Rebecca, thank you. So here's some examples of some of the models that the volunteers have done. If you click on the one at the bottom, Rebecca, that takes us to the Holmes Lynn site. So you mentioned the Holmes Lynn site. So I actually spent quite a bit of time in the middle of February doing some models. If you click on the one at the bottom left, that's the engine house, yeah, which Andy and Rebecca mentioned before. So this is a relatively simple model. It was a few more images. It was basically about 100, I think. But this was just done using a mobile phone, yeah, and walking around and being careful to actually take shots of the image here. You're not looking for the world's best photograph. What you're looking for is an image, a set of images which have a good overlap. And personally, I don't know what Nick thinks, but I kind of go for like a 75 or 80% overlap, so that you get it lets the software, the meta shape, work better. But you can see this is Armstrong's engine bed, which has great historic significance, of course. It was one of the early deployments as part of the Blackett level, and it really got me fired up. So I was doing lots of kind of research on you know, kind of engines and, you know, kind of the design for these systems. It's really cool. Thanks for that, Rebecca. Yeah, so the top. So I just thought I'd mention this because what we've tended to do, the volunteers, is when we've looked at sites, we try to contribute to Historic England's missing pieces. And so it's a very easy thing to do. You can go on, you can create your account, and you're encouraged to basically upload some of your own pictures, and also to be able to make some comments, what it means to you, you know, kind of, you know, what the historic significance is to you of this particular site. And here's one that I did for Holmes Lynn, and you notice that I did a sort of modern day picture of how it is now, but also on the right, very kindly, a photograph thought to be from the 1870s, which is taken from a document written by William and Ian Forbes. So they very kindly let me use that. And so you can see a sort of then and now picture. And so we could go into this in all sorts of detail. You know, you've got the picture of the engine bed, the mine shop. You can't really see the shaft, which is on the right, but and you can see to the left, you can see where the water wheel was and where the accumulator building was, which was actually the the origins of the water for the engine. And not on this picture is actually, which is very interesting and not part of the historic monument, is the whole water feed that comes down from the upper reaches of the East Allen, which we've now tracked and looked at with LiDAR. So it's pretty cool. And you can see basically that with the missing pieces, I've also added links to the Sketchfab site, so people can see those as well at the bottom there, right? So that's useful. Thank you, Rebecca. Next one. So now I'm going to touch on basically the work that we've been doing slightly more recently with NenTed Mines, and a contact that came from Cumbria University. So there's a lady who, Ellie Evans, who is doing a PhD in developing a toolkit for the monitoring and condition of outdoor heritage sites. And what that is using is basically 3D models, or in this specific case, point clouds. So no texture, just the point clouds of a particular site or object. And what you do is that you do a point cloud of an object, say in February. This is specifically what I did, and one in August. And so you use some clever software called Cloud Compare to bring those models together, and it compares the point cloud. So you can see in very high accuracy, I've found, the differences. So it highlights potential problems, erosion and damage to footpaths. Now, Ellie's stuff here is basically more focused on the impact of visitors, a number of visitors. So there is a part of this which is looking at how you monitor visitors, where they go, and also the paths they take. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. But in the discussions with Pete and the guys at NenTed, what we did was kind of identify areas that we think would be worthwhile trialing this technology. So we decided to have a look around Carr's mine shop and Carr's mine entrance, which is at the top end of this picture here. Thank you, Rebecca, that's great. And basically it was kind of looking at the footpaths, but also just to the top end of the Carr's mine entrance, we noticed that there's some water damage. So we thought maybe we could actually highlight that or see if it worked with that. So really cool stuff. So thank you, Rebecca. Next one. So I think I've said some of this actually, but basically this is the backdrop here is a picture of a two-dimensional picture of the area that we wanted to concentrate on. So you can see to the left, there's the mine shop. You can see to the right, there's the Carr's mine entrance. And so, as I said, we're trying to do a comparison of 3D models taken at different times. And with the focus on basically looking at the footpaths, and also we decided to include some of the areas for water damage. Let me add as well that really, personally, I'm not an expert in terms of like drone surveying or anything like that. But so personally, what I've tried to do is to keep it as simple as possible. And I've tried to use things like really an entry-level drone. It's a DJI Mini thing, you know, which you can get off eBay, right, as I did. And actually, Cloud Compare software is free. So again, you're trying to keep it attractive for people who perhaps don't have the sophistication and the expense to go for surveying, but perhaps might be attractive for volunteers. So next one, please. So this is actually a bit of a Mickey Mouse slide here, but effectively this is just describing the setup that I used for this part of the project. So I use a DJI Mini 3. I use that's the drone. I use some mapping and planning software, which again is about 30 quid. You know, it's not expensive stuff. And then you can effectively, you can program your drone to go and take photographs in a very orderly and organized way. Now, remember I said before, it's nice to have that sort of 75–80% overlap. That's programmed into this software. So you basically upload the program onto the drone, and it basically goes off and takes the pictures for you, which you then put into the software and align and create the models. So also key part of this, on some of the close-ups, I have used my mobile phone again. So again, thank you, Rebecca. Next one. So I don't know whether we can do this. I think we have to go out of presentation mode. That's it. And so if you go onto that, very good, brilliant. So here, what I've tried to do, there's this first one here is basically a Google satellite picture of the area and wider that we're looking at. And then if you basically start clicking on the little eyes to the right hand side, Rebecca, what you can do is you can start to bring up the visitor routes. So I won't bore you with the details, but basically these were done by hand over a period of a day or so, and basically you end up recording where the visitors go. It's not an incredibly sophisticated way of doing it. It's basically a pen and a map, but you digitize them, and what you can then do is align them and put them onto the model. The next one that's put on there is a two-dimensional ortho view of the site taken with the drone. If you then click on the cloud compare model, yeah, that's the one. If you click on that,
I already put it on.
That's it. That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got it? Just click on the little eye. Click on the little eye. Oh well,
it's not coming
it's not
up.
coming up on that one. But I tell you what, if you so what I would say about this is that effectively what you can do, you can see where the visitor routes are. You can see them following those footpaths. You can also find other people wandering off quite randomly, but you can see where the impact is from a perspective of visitors. Now, you can, if you click onto the next slide, you can see this is basically, it's a 2D shot of the cloud compare model. Now, if you remember, there was a footpath going up from the smelt mill, going up around to the top, and then actually going past the mine shop on to the entrance to the mine, to the mine entrance, Carr's mine entrance. And what you do once you've got your two models and you compare them, you look at the differences, and you can set like a threshold for where the differences are particularly exaggerated. So red is where it's bad. Yeah. So here, that red is where the footpaths are. So it could be that basically the paths are being disturbed by all the visitors walking along. Also, there could be additional water damage. Also, if you look to the right, there's a slight area where it's slightly redder, and that's that water damage area. So you kind of, I mean, basically, it's good news for this photogrammetry, and it's good news for the cloud compare, because it is highlighting these differences that you might not see with the naked eye. Because this is basically looking at differences that are down to the kind of, well, the rocks that are moving around there are to the centimetre level, right? And again, I would add that I'm not using any sophisticated technology here to make these measurements. So to my mind, that is a key result that we've achieved with this project. And also what we've done is that we, with Pete and the guys at NTED, we've agreed to continue to use this approach to monitor aspects of the mine and how things are changing. Next one, Rebecca. So reflections. I thought I'd call it reflections rather than conclusions, because we are talking about optics and light, aren't we? But I would say basically creating good quality 3D photogrammetric models is not as difficult or as mysterious as it may sound. You know, I would say from a personal perspective, I found it extremely satisfying and rewarding process, and it does offer you a unique way to immerse yourself and find out about the rich mining heritage of the North Pennines. I got absolutely absorbed and obsessed with all the stuff to do with Holmes then, and gives you great insight to these important mining sites. And it also, as Rebecca and Andy and Gary will say later, it helps feed into the heritage consolidation projects that we'll talk about later. In terms of the the technology you use, it sounds very fancy and it sounds very sophisticated, and it can be, but actually you can get very good results from everyday photographic equipment, even mobile phones, and you can create high quality 3D models, and software doesn't have to be that complicated. In some cases, it's free. Excuse me. There's plenty of room to expand your technical knowledge as well. And I would also add that basically I've been involved in this, underpinning this important academic research project on site monitoring with Ellie Evans and Cumbria University. And we will continue to use this at Nented Mines for part of site monitoring. And it's great. I mean, really, from me, a personal thing, thank you to Rebecca and Andy. It's an exciting and leading edge.
First up, we've got Gary from Heritage Consolidation, who is our contractor who's doing all the consolidation works on our 8 key sites. So over to you, Gary.
Hi everybody, I hope you're enjoying this lovely weather. So yeah, I'm Gary Simpson, and we were lucky enough to win the competitive tender to do the work for this project, which is fantastic. My favourite type of project is these industrial monuments. One second, see if I can figure out how to change the slide. No, I can't. I promise I'm much better with stone than I am with technology. Right, so just a little brief about who we are and what we do. So that's some of the organisations that we work with quite a lot, and some of our previous contracts and the various things that we work on. So we do scheduled monuments pretty much exclusively. So you can see lots of castles and churches and stuff on there, as well as industrial monuments and lots of bridges. Just a little bit of comparison with some of the stuff we've done in the past, just to give you an idea of our sort of qualifications to do this type of work. So this is Constant Copper Mines down in the Lake District, and another mine with lots of little structures all over the place, like the ones we're doing here. And you can see just the sheer logistics of getting materials and people and everything to these sites. Now, I don't know if that pointer's coming through there. Can anybody see that pointer? Yes. So you can see all these different levels here, all these walls. They were all washed away. There was a spill from the dam, and it came right through the middle of here and washed all that away. So we had to rebuild all of them, which meant taking all the stone from down the bottom and taking it all back up to the top. But the only thing we'd use is a quad bike, because that's just a little quad bike track running up there. So lots of problems, but very interesting work to do. This one, a lot of people might recognise, Dukesfield Arches. We did this one a few years ago. You can see the problem with the arches here is there's lots of trees growing out the top of them, and well, lots of things falling off basically. So that's the before shot, and that's the after, or nearly after. We haven't quite finished, we've still got some tools there. You see we put a soft cap on the top. Now we have got a clear membrane layer on top of that as well, because the damage was being done by the amount of water coming through and destroying the arches themselves. So by putting the clear membrane on and then the turf capping, not only does it provide a thermal barrier on the top, but it also stops all that water going through. And onto the Lolas, the interesting stuff. So Frollo Meadows is one of the ones we've done this year. Slightly controversial one in the approach, I suspect, that some people know about. But the rule of thumb that we work on with Historic England and everybody at the Lolas is minimum intervention. So everything we do is minimum intervention. We don't want to do more than is necessary. On Frollo Meadows, unfortunately, it's one of the most unstable structures I think I've ever worked on. So you can see the inside here. This is just a side tunnel coming in, but if you look at the roof, it's basically in areas a completely dry stone structure. So there's no lime in there, and it's just relying on the weight of the soil and the spoil on top to keep it together. But the side walls have started leaning out, So as soon as the sidewalls start leaning out, you lose that pressure on the top, and everything starts to open up. You can see all these open joints here, and you can even see a couple of stones that have fallen out onto the ground. So in order to do repairs on Fuller Meadows, it's been necessary in places to fill. Now this was an approach, again, discussed with Historic England. They came out on site, and we went through how we were going to do it in areas where it's not a massive defect. It's just a localized area. So we've done is filled those areas and put the profile back, so that, you know, in a few years, once the soil grows, the grass grows back on the soil, you won't really see those repairs. But obviously there is a blockage in the tunnel now. But access from the other end is easy enough, so you can get in both ends. But there's about 60 ton of stone gone in each of those holes. And these tunnels are not small, but they are, like I say, the farmer has lost cows into them before. So realistically, there's a lot of, you've got to balance between the needs of the scheduled monument and keeping it as good as we can, also with the safety of people and livestock in mind, because you don't want to be falling through there. Now this is there's some contention whether these are flues intended to just vent the top of the tunnel, or the flue, sorry, so that the people that were cleaning it were able to breathe while they were doing the work, or whether these are draw holes to initially get the fire started down the bottom and draw the smoke up through. But they're providing the biggest weakness in the top of the monument. The issue we've got with the monument is, once we got the environmental assessment of the inside of the tunnel, basically nobody should really be going in there ever. It's so toxic in there. So we decided an approach to try and do as much of the repairs from above as possible. So you can see here, and it's not a very interesting photograph, but hanging on that chain under there is a piece of plyboard, and we dropped that down through the hole, pulled that back up so it was touching, and then it's filled with a no fines concrete. So that is concrete but just gravel. It hasn't got any fine sand in it or anything, and that provides a very porous structure. You can just see a bit of it here, so that any moisture, any rain, anything like that can still travel through the monument. So it's not going to puddle up above it and cause extra weight, but it just provides that little bit of stability to it. And it is a reversible intervention as well. That can be knocked out fairly easily if you wanted to, which is always a good thing if you're repairing a monument, that if you can make it reversible in the future, just in case things change, you know. We did have lots of friendly cows following us everywhere as well, so I'll put that on. Now, Middle Hope Shield. So most of the work at Middle Hope Shield is complete now. Again, lots of standing structures left over, and the main problem we had here is trees. So you can see all these trees growing in here, and they've collapsed this section of wall there, and basically that is totally gone. Now that's the before picture. That's during. You can see a lot of material behind here as well. So it's a good strong wall, or it was before the trees. You can see the tree stump there that we've taken out, and that's been eco-plugged so that it'll just die off and rot back. And this is just rebuilding the front face on. Now you can see the original is dry stone wall, but it's carrying a lot of weight. So what Tristan, the architect from Droonin Architects, has got us doing is making what we call anchor points. It's a technique we developed on Hadrian's Wall. You see the areas of Hadrian's Wall where they've got a lot of grass on the top where people walk on it, and that extra weight, when that was originally put on in, I think it was the 1940s, that extra weight has caused the outside of the wall to move out. So we've repaired long sections of that, but to give that the extra strength to cope with the extra weight on the top, we invented this anchor point technique. Now basically that involves, you can see the string line here, so we build it back as a dry stone, but then we'll have an anchor point where we'll introduce a load of line every sort of half a metre. We'll tail bed 4 or 5 of the stones, and that just gives that extra bit of strength to the structure. So when that's built back up, it won't be going anywhere. And there it is built back up. So you can see the trees gone, everything's looking smart, the wall's built back up. Again, we are this ethos of minimum intervention, so we're not fixing absolutely everything. You can see we fixed the little wall heads here and here. We've redone what we could see of the structure there. We can only put back what we can identify as genuinely having come from that collapse. So you can see the wall here that's been rebuilt. That's the one with the anchor points in because it's carrying all that weight. But in a year or two, you shouldn't even be able to tell that we've been, basically. So people say, oh, what have you done? But we have done something, I promise. There you are, that's just it from a different angle. It looks like quite a small area, but if you look at the size of the trees, you'll see it's quite a large area. And also, all the materials were brought on site with a quad bike with balloon tyres down this slope here. To minimise any damage to the site, and then just walked onto the site so that we didn't cause any damage to this area of SI. See the rebuilt in corners. See very little damage to the ground where we've come in. It's just a little bit of mud. Orgill Mill, right, here we are. So Orgill Mill is ongoing at the moment. Or it would be if it wasn't snowing horrendously outside. So a lovely little job, very interesting. Here's a 3D model, or it would be a 3D model if I could have figured out how to actually put that on the presentation. But like I say, I'm a lot better with stone than I am with computers. So you can see we've cleared it out, and the flues head off up in this direction. So the furnaces are here and here. And there's another one behind there that I can't quite see. Now, if you can see on this wall here, we've got props at the moment keeping this wall stable as we're doing the work inside, because this wall is lying out true by quite some way. Now, didn't want to put buttresses on the outside of the wall because that sort of changes the whole look of the monument. So what the architect Tristan and the engineer have come up with is basically an internal buttress. So you can see the wall leaning here, and we're putting a steel structure frame up here, and these are gabion baskets. Now we've had to change this because the calculations were slightly wrong. They had a decimal point in the wrong place, so we need 2 gabion baskets on there to provide the weight needed. And then we're basically putting patras plates through the wall with a plate on the front, and that's just going to stop that movement and that pull that you get with the wall. And we don't need to carry the whole weight of the wall. We just need to stop that initial movement. So yeah, there's quite a lot of work in doing them, but it's something that we haven't done much of before. So we put frames like this up on the outside, but not put them through the wall, so it should be quite interesting. I'm looking forward to this. And I should just mention we've got the kind permission of Doonan Architects to use their drawings. Sorry, I apologise if everyone can hear my little puppies scraping at the door. Yeah, so we've got their permission to use their drawings, which is great because a lot of these we have jobs obviously we'll move on to next. We haven't actually started yet, so we can use their drawings to show you basically what we're going to be doing. So this is Coldbury, and this is a job for year 2. Now you can see obviously the main problem is that you've got areas of collapse and the roof is lying on the floor inside, as most of the roof was in Orgill Mill before that. So basically we will be clearing out under archaeological supervision, of course. So Tony Little from Vindamora will be watching us like a hawk when we do all the work in here. So we'll get that all cleaned out, and then you can see on here these are the existing plans. Now if we move on to the proposed plans, you'll see how Tristan sends these out to us and how we price these jobs. So you've got the different areas, so that hatch mark in there, these big areas here, they're all to be repointed. The new stonework is in that slightly lighter coloured blue, and the darker blue is rough racking. Now rough racking is just a technique where the wall head's quite steep, so we make them so the water sheds off them, basically. That's all it is. Nothing too complicated. But also you'll note the green on top of these walls is soft capping. Now soft capping is something in the heritage sector we've been doing more and more of these last few years. It is and proven excellent technique for looking after the top of wall heads, because you imagine the wall heads, they're fine most of the year with water shedding off, no problem at all. But then in the winter, when you get the snow sits on top of them, and lime is porous, so as that snow melts a little bit, that moisture goes into the wall head, and then nighttime comes along and it freezes, so it expands slightly. So you keep getting this constant movement in the lime, and it just destroys the wall heads. So what the soft capping is, it's not really there to shed water, it's a thermal barrier. It does shed the water, but it's really there as a thermal barrier just to provide that protection from that sort of freeze-thaw cycle that you get when you've got any kind of snow or ice on the top of the walls. And we've used this, well, from Lindisfarne to Denali Castle in Scotland, everywhere, and it's great. It's a really good technique. So the way we do it is we basically, rather than putting soil on the top and then putting turf over the top of it, we get the turf and we put the first layer upside down, hanging down the sides of the wall, and then we put 2 layers in the middle, and then we fold it all back on top of itself, and we bamboo it all together. The bamboo just rots away, but it holds the grass long enough so we can do it pretty much any time of year. It'll hold it in place long enough for the grass to grow and to take, and it really does protect the wall heads very, very well. I'm trying to see the interesting parts of this, really, the hanging fireplace that's just hanging in the wall. So we've got that to rebuild. That'd be good. Well, right, these are slightly more difficult to describe the techniques, but it's basically the same. Most of the repair techniques that we're using are very similar. So on the wheel pit at Holmes Lane, now there's lots to do at Holmes Lane. We have got some steel works to put in just to hold the wall together better as well, and lots of repointing, obviously. Deep tamping in places as well. That is where there's deep crevices in the wall, so we'll either use stemming sticks to push the lime right back into those until those holes and those voids in the middle of the wall are full, or we sometimes use a pressure pump. So we have a little pot that we pump full of pressure, and we put lime in that, and then we can put a nozzle into the wall, like up to 1/2 metre, and pump it back over and make sure it's absolutely full and strong. So yeah, again, little bits of soft capping, but not too much, because there's a lot of large stones on the top, so it's much better at shedding. A little bit of structural stitching you just see here. Now that is just a Helifix rebar, so it's just a 6 or 8 mil, depending on the specification for this particular job. Stainless steel threaded bar and a cementitious grout, so we'll just push that in, and that will take 1.5 tons per bar. So if you're putting in, 2 bars, you've got 3 tons worth of extra strength in that wall. Okay, so again, different repair at Holmes Lane. You can see there's a lot more building up on this one, and consolidation of the core work. Now, consolidation of the core work, this is where you've got a bit of wall, the internal leaf is still standing, the external face is falling off it, but you can't really put that face back. It's usually where somebody's robbed the stone, to be honest. So it might not be the case on this particular job, but so we don't want the wall's thick enough that it's stable. So we want to do minimum intervention. So we're not going to rebuild that whole face. What we do is we'll consolidate the existing core, so we'll just make it stronger, and in places we might make it thicker. Now we'll bring it almost to the front of the face of the wall, but just back like 6 inches, so that wouldn't be enough for a new face to be put on in the future. The reason being is that a professional will be able to read that structure's been altered. something's been done to it. So for the general public, it's just going to look like it's fallen down. But if anybody comes along in the future, nowadays we have the records that go into the archives and everything. But back in the day, you wouldn't know whether it's been tampered with or not. But that's why we bring it to the front a little bit, just so that you can see that work has been done on those buildings. Again, more repairs, very similar. Only difference here is we've got some really large blocks that have been displaced. Now they will have to be moved back into position, and that will be done with little airbags. We'll put little airbags underneath in the joint just to lift them up, to take that weight off, and then we'll just push on that side and get it back in. When I say just push, it'll be quite a hefty push because these are enormous blocks. Allen's melt mill. So this is just an overview of the Bingsteads or bow steams. I think the Bingsteads there. Yeah, they are. So you can see this hatched area that we'll be working on. That is the area where we're going to be clearing out vegetation and clearing. There's loads of little saplings growing here. So we've just got, after that, we've got the brick vault to repair, which I think just shows. Nope, it doesn't show that at all. So this is in quite a bad state of repairs. We did some work here a few years back, all the work to the left-hand side of this, where we built all these walls and put these little walkways in and stuff. So that was quite an interesting one because it was almost completely underground. We had to dig quite a lot of it out, so we had archaeologists there all the time to keep an eye on us. And of course the flues come out just up here, and we repaired some of the internals of the flues there as well last time. But this time really it is just quite a light touch at Allen's melt mill. There's not that much going on. We're removing a few trees and sorting out the wall heads so that they are just maintained. They're not in any danger of falling down in the future. Right. Next one is the ore works, Allen heads. So this bit here is probably going to be my favourite repair on this job. Which sounds a bit daft, but you can see the quite nice bottom in this stream here. So we've got to reroute the water around to get this dry, and then we've got a load of this, about 30 square meters, to bring out in this direction, and then we've got to rebuild this wall back this way, and then fill in all the way at the back there. And there's some talk with Tristan, the architect, as well, that we might need ground anchors in here. That sounds very complicated, but it's not. It's basically just a big screw that you screw in, and it'll just hold that back. And we'll put them on the internal face, and then face up in front of them so you won't see them. But we haven't actually come to that decision yet because we don't know how solid this ground is until we start work on it. So as ever with these jobs, there's a little bit of suck it and see. You'll just have to wait until you get into the job to see how things are going to change and how you're going to have to evolve with it. Which is the reason. I mean, I used to build houses, but I've been doing the heritage sector now for 20 plus years because it's interesting, because you get problems all the time that you've got to solve. When you're building houses, you're just putting one stone on top of another all day. It can get a little bit monotonous, so I like these. They test the brain a bit, which is great, or what little brain there is. So yeah, we've got lots and lots of Allen head. We've got the stream that runs alongside them. You can see the Bingsteads in the background that were repaired a few years back. Now this stream, I haven't put a great deal of it on the slides because it's pretty much like this for a couple hundred meters. So we've got little bits of repair where we've got the cappings there to go back on, and otherwise we'd be hard capping and then soft capping the tops. So you can see most of the capping stones are in the river, so we'll be getting the waders on and fishing them out. This is the repair I was talking about. So that's the entranceway into the tunnel on the first slide that I showed you. And this is the end of the wall, so you can see we've got quite a significant amount of wall to rebuild, and also all of the bottom of that stream has to be remade. So a lot of work in that for us. We're looking forward to that job. It's a challenge. Certainly my son's in the business as well. He's sort of 21. He's just finished his apprenticeship, and he won't have seen anything like this before. So it's great to try and bring the younger ones on with something that's a bit more difficult. Okay, moving on to Nenthead. I believe there's been quite a bit of talk about Nenthead already, so I'll be fairly quick with this one. So we've just got to uncover and just repair all the heads again and make sure everything's nice and stable. You can see the drawings there from doing an architect. So he just overlaid that on the top. So we've got all the repairs to the sleeper walls and everything to do here, and some structural work to do along here.
And
Right,
Nick is
can
now
you-
sharing his screen. Yeah, we can hear you.
Right,
Thanks very
you
much,
see
Nick.
mine? You see me?
Yeah.
Good. Right. Hello, everybody. I'm Nick Unwin, and I'll be talking about modelling mines, mining models, and how we can use 3D imaging to help us see and conserve the mining heritage all around us. So modelling mines is the first bit, and Kevin's already talked to you about a thing called photogrammetry, which is a big, complicated sounding word, but really it just means measuring with light. And if we go back in time, it has its roots in somewhere around about the late 1700s in observation corps, and they would stick people up in hot air balloons, tethered balloons, and they would look to see where the artillery shells were firing. And if they had a couple of these posted around the battlefield, then they could actually do triangulation and find out where and guide the fire onto the target more accurately. And this sort of thing carried on like this until World War One. And the other picture that you can see there, the black and white one, is an American observer. And the only thing that's really changed there is he's using a field telephone to communicate rather than semaphore flags. But things were changing, and very, very quickly, aircraft came along, and they were able to mount cameras on those and take flights over areas. And they could produce a thing there called a stereo pair, where they took two photographs at very slight different angles at the same time. And you could look at those through these stereoscopes. And they were used even by the RAF right the way through to the 1980s, just as satellite systems came in. And they work in a very, very similar way to the 3D imaging that you might see on TVs with the red and the green specks. And here we've got a Canadian guy who's actually looking through at some photographs taken. He's taking measurements, and you can actually see things in 3D on those. So theatres of war, pictures from various areas on Omaha Beach. If we look at the next slide, if that comes through, then it's not just a pretty picture, but we can take a thing called an orthomosaic or an orthomap. And that isn't a single picture there, it's multiple pictures which have been corrected and put together. They can be quite accurate. So they can take measurements from them and they can see things that are really up to date. So what do we need to do? Photogrammetry, as Kevin mentioned earlier on. Fortunately, we don't need a huge bomber and a range of cameras like that. We can do it using our mobile phones, our SLRs. We've got consumer drones, which are quite cheap to buy, all the way through to more expensive drones, which link up to the satellite systems and are really, really accurate to around about a centimetre or two. And the nice thing is, all of that fits nicely into a camera backpack. So the picture there, I've got a drone, I've got a satellite receiver, that all goes into a camera backpack, which is quite useful because some of the mining sites are not accessible by road very easily. In fact, some of them in the more remote parts of the Pennines, you could be walking for an hour or more to actually get out to them. So it's important that things are quite light and portable. And yes, I can get my sandwiches and the flask in there as well. On top of that, we need a computer and some software. Run on a laptop, on a PC, ranges from free to very, very expensive. The capabilities are very different between them. So it takes your pick and you get what you get from it. Mining models. It's all very nice actually having these models, but they're pretty to look at, but they're not much use there. So we want to actually mine information from them. And the kind of things that we can do with them are make virtual sites, and these are accessible worldwide. And basically, people can visit and see the site without actually having to travel there. So you can see the North Pennines sketchbook page there, with a few models that Kevin and myself have done. And these can help drive and increase engagement with the public. So you can actually go to them, you can take a look at them, you can move them around. We can set points of interest to explain particular features on the site, kind of giving a guided tour there. And for shows and presentations, we can create fly-throughs and virtual tours as well. Digital twins is a phrase you might hear at the moment. It's quite popular in the construction industry. And these are basically 3D models that help us to record the sites as they are. They can be created before, during, or after any works that are going on, as with the work that Gary's been doing on the various sites, and help us to create a baseline to flag up changes and things. So these could be things like structural movements, loss of structure, ground movement, tree and scrub encroachment. It can give us different viewpoints. So topographic models, which can highlight features which aren't obvious to us on the ground, such as earthworks, alignment of buildings, buried man-made features. And humans are excellent at spotting unnatural lines and features in the landscape. So things like embankments, leats, tracks and holloways, field walls. So enough of the theory. I'll show you a few slides from some of the sites. So Allen Mills, the Frolau Meadows. This is an aerial view looking up to Flow Moss along two of the flues. I'm hoping that this is actually going to work for you. It's one of the 3D models. And you can see it moving around there, and it can pan in. Take a look at things, you can zoom in, and all of the images from these, as we mentioned earlier, are available to be sent to the National Archives for future use. People can come back and look at them and get more detailed shots than are in the 3D models. Again, an aerial view of Frolau, this time looking in a different direction, towards High Broadwood, where the flues converge. And if you actually look at the site on the ground, it's a little bit of a jumble of earthworks. It's not exactly clear what's going on there. If we have a look at a top-down view of that, we begin to see some of the flues. So we've got lines coming down from the top of the picture and then diverging off. We can see the flues splitting. If we change over and look at that in a false colour that shows us the elevation changes in the land, then we can again see the structures, the flues there, and begin to see the other flue, which wasn't readily visible at the top right of the image. And we've also got lines from the ploughing on the fields at the other side there. This particular site was thought to have had a chimney there, one of the very early chimneys, but this is not showing any signs of that in the groundworks there. So it could be that we need to have a look around and see if that's in a slightly different section of the flue network. We can also use the images from the 3D models in reports. So again, here at Frolau, we're just using that to highlight where various features were, various parts of the collapses and things. These are far more up-to-date images than you'll get off the Google satellite or Bing mapping. They can be several years old. So it's really useful to be able to bring these in to be able to document what's there. Just as Gary said, you get quite a lot of friendly visitors on site, such as the cows coming over to take a look and see what we're doing when we're actually taking photographs for the models. Right, Middle Valley Mines over above Westgate in Weardale. It's been mined for several hundred years, and there's around about 10 to 15 different mines and levels within the immediate valley. If we look at some of the models that I've taken up there, it just shows a top-down view of an old London Lead Company mine, Middle Mine itself. And you can see one or two features in there, but mainly it's a track, the field walls and the stream. And if you change that over into the false colour, the elevation, then we can begin to see some different features in the landscape. I'm not sure whether you can see my mouse. That's in the top left of the screen there is a track. We've got an area over here, which is a circular one on the right-hand side, and that could be the top of a shaft or a bell pit, which is not actually marked on any of the maps of the area. We've got a railway line coming in, crossing over the stream, coming up to the top of the picture, and then reversing back down the western side of the valley. But if we take a closer look there, then we can actually begin to see some things which may actually show us where even the sleepers have been for the railway tracks. What's most interesting here, though, is this linear area next to the wall, and that could actually be a buried platform or loading area for the railway line. If you look at that on the ground, you just see a grassy mound, and you dismiss it. But that could be worth looking at in the future to see what it actually is there. A few hundred yards further down the valley, we change over to one of the sites that Gary's been working on, which is Middle Up Shield. And again, if you look at me, I'm stood on top of a grassy mound, which I didn't particularly pay much attention to at the time. But if I look at the information from the aerial mapping that I've done, you begin to see a linear structure there that is jumping out. Now, all of the entries for this site just say that that is a pile of spoil from the mine. But the fact that there's a linear line there with a couple of sharp angles says that actually might be a buried structure. So it might be more than just mine tailings. And indeed, if we go back and we look into some of the early maps, then yes, we can see there is a structure mark there. And again, a little bit to the north of that, we can, if we take a look at it on the ground, we can begin to pick up the remains of some stone walls there. So again, it's a feature which could be worth looking at if there were to be any archaeological surveys done there in the future. Also mentioned earlier that we can look at ground slippage and the like. This is just to one side of Middle Up Shield, the mine, and an area of ground has slipped away. We've now got a baseline for that, so we can monitor that in future and see if it's changing at all. And also a little bit above that, we can see the railway embankment. If we take a look at that, we find that there's been a blockage in the culvert under the railway line, and that's blown out and caused some big erosion there. That's actually still active. And a few weeks back, we had some heavy rains up at Middle Up, which washed off a lot of the gravel and surfaces on some of the tracks around there. And I was able to go back last week and take some more photographs of it with the drones, just to see if there'd been any changes. That's one of the models from there. And again, fortunately, we can see there hasn't been very much of a big change there. Why is that important? Well, if all of that was to wash down, it could actually end up blocking the stream below, which would divert the burn actually into the scheduled monument site. That would undo all the good work that Gary's been doing there. Obviously, we want to know if that sort of thing is going to happen, get a warning of it. And move on to the Cumbrian side, to Orgill. That's a 3D model of the smelt mill, just before Gary's done any work there. So looking at that satellite imagery, we can see the A66 through Coward carriageway running immediately to the south of it, and there's a caravan park above. We can't really see an awful lot more of the site there.
Nick, it's
If
stuck
we look,
again.
okay, might catch up. Can you see anything there?
We're still seeing the 3D model.
Okay. Is it caught up?
Yes.
Right.
We're now seeing the A66 picture you talked about.
Right. Okay. This is a satellite image from Google. You can see the A66 there, green, grasses, trees, and the caravan park. You can't see much else of the site. If we look at the drone image, then you can begin to see a little bit more. Begin to pick out the mill, but we've still got trees and things in the way. The elevation model, that gives us more detail. We can begin to pick out the lines from the smelt mill, from the flues that run up to the chimney. We can also see another structure towards the top right of the photograph there. That's a Roman signal station. The people that built the flue in the chimney very kindly ploughed straight through it. They didn't look after the history very much in the late 1800s. If I move forward a little bit, we can get some useful information from the models. This is asking it to show me a profile through that signal station. So it's showing me the heights there, and you can see the outer ditch, embankment, an inner ditch, the raised mound in the middle, and then the ditches again. The little red bit in the middle of that is probably just some rushes that are growing there. We can ask it to do a similar kind of thing with the mill itself. This is a corrected photograph, so it takes all the perspective out of it. The black and white markers there are calibration markers where
Nick,
it takes
give it a
satellite.
couple of seconds to catch up with you again. We're still on the side profile of the signal station.
Right, yeah.
Sorry, I just thought I better tell you.
That's okay. Was it caught up?
No, not yet. We now have the aerial view with black and white markers on.
Right. Yeah. So the black and white markers are targets that are used to calibrate with a GPS reader. They're fed into the software. They allow that model to be very, very accurate. So we can actually take dimensions from it, which are accurate to within centimeters or possibly even millimeters. Just move to the next one. So again here, I'm asking it to give me a section through the mill. And hopefully that appears, and we can see on the side we've got the wheel pit to the outer wall with the height, and then we've got a profile across the floor of the mill, the interior walls, and the loading bay and the exterior wall at the other side. You can take face views of those, which are again dimensionally correct. We can use those in reports, such as those that Tristan will use. So for recording, for planning purposes, it's all really useful stuff. One other thing that we can do with it, hopefully we can have a time machine. By that, we don't have to have HG wells. We don't have to go into orbit or be chased around by green men. We just need our wonderful RAF again. And from the mid-40s onwards, they took a series of photograph surveys running across the entire country. And we're fortunate enough to find 12 to 13 photographs of an area called Pike Law, which is in Upper Teesdale. Again, it's an area that's been intensively mined for several hundred years, and it's really difficult to see what's going on there on the ground. So I just thought, well, can we actually take a look back in time and see what the land was like 30, 40, 50 years ago from these photographs? I tried it with the software and it wouldn't do it. Take it and manually give it the point. So I went through each of the photographs and told it these are common points in each of the photographs. Do that enough times and refine where the points are positioned, and I managed to make a model. Apologies if this doesn't really show up very well. It's a 3D representation of what the land looked like, and we can pan that round, zoom in, and do various things with it. And that gives us an accurate look back in time to when the RAF took those photographs. We can flatten that out as well. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide there. And we can georeference that. So we can overlay that against modern satellite imagery and modern mapping as well. And that's useful because it allows us to potentially see where buildings were, where adit levels, entrances and things like that were. Again, coming back to things like erosion, we can take a look at it there, and if you look at the stream bed running down there and the hush which are in the centre of the picture, if I move forward to the current view, and we can see that the stream bed has actually moved quite significantly and is eaten into the end of a hush. And that is useful because it allows us to monitor and see how much erosion is taking place. And there's a chap at Newcastle University, Mark Kinsey, who's been doing some work looking at the metal erosion that is coming off the mine tips and things and being washed into the waterways. That's of interest to people like the Coal Authority and the Environment Agency to keep the rivers clean. So it doesn't just have to be landscapes that we can look back in time to. If we want to reconstruct the past, then given enough images, we can actually take a look and rebuild buildings, street scenes and the like. These are just some images from work that Francesca Cordelli and Sarah Moreno have done. And it's of a railway station in Sicily. Moving very quickly on now. Archaeological recording. So we don't just have to have pretty pictures of my foot next to a stone. This was found at one of the mining sites in Weardale, and it's thought to be an example. Is it caught up?
Sorry, it's getting there, but I was just giving you a 2-minute warning for your timing.
Okay, sorry.
That's right.
So it's thought to be an early kind of mortar stone where they would break the ore up with hammers. And things we can do with photogrammetry is we can actually take a look and we can show where that object was found in relation to the site around it. So we can put it into a context. And again, visitors from around the world can spin that round, take a look, see what other things are in the area. And again, we can make 3D models of things which can be spun around. So just going to move on from there. And we can do then and now images, which is something Kevin showed you as well. So again, site at Weardale, which is Middle Greenlaws. It suffered severely from some erosion in the mid-90s. And this is from a model from earlier on in the year. And Ian Forbes was kind enough to send me an image of it as it was in the 1970s. And you can see from a similar kind of viewpoint that there's quite a severe amount of erosion and damage gone on there. So, just changes on those, and I shall call a halt at that point.
I'm David Penn, and I'm a Quaker. I attend the Quaker meeting at Allendale, which is, if anybody knows Allendale, it's hidden down the hill at Woolly Burn Foot, rather than being in the centre of the village. So unless you go down there, you won't probably have seen the meeting house. But there have been Quakers in the Allen Valleys since the very beginning of the Quaker movement. What I'm going to do this morning is just to talk about Quakers' involvement in lead mining and in the silver business, which is connected, rather than give you a full history of Quakers. But just a little bit of background. Quakers were one of the sects that grew out of the period of the Civil War, and they're probably the most radical of the religious movements. They dispensed with paid ministers, they dispensed with any liturgy, and even today our services are basically periods of silence with ministry from anybody who feels moved by the Spirit to talk. So that's the background. So Quakers developed and emerged very much at the same time, coincidentally, as the big growth in the lead mining industry in the late 17th century. And the story of the lead mining is intertwined with the history of Quakers and locally, and I hadn't realised until I started looking at this just how closely they were involved. I knew there was a connection because the London Lead Company is often known as the Quaker Company, but what I didn't know was whether there was much connection between that, which obviously by its name was based in London, and any Quakers that were found round and about the Allen Valleys. But it turns out there is quite a lot of interconnection, and I'm going to talk about a few individuals who were both Quakers and directly involved in the lead mining industry. The activities of the lead mining in the North Pennines are principally down to two major companies, as most of you probably know. One was the what began as Blackett, and then through marriages and so on became Beaumont and then Wentworth. So that family business that ran from really the 1850s, 1860s, right through until the end of the 19th century. And their concerns were concentrated in the east and west Allen Valleys and over to Weardale. The London Lead Company, its main area of operation was the whole Alston Moor. So they were working in competition, but also cooperating when it suited them. And what's interesting is how similar they were in their ways of working and their ways of dealing with their staff and looking after the miners. So the next slide. So first person I want to talk about is Charles Alsop. And he probably, I'd probably go as far as to say that if it wasn't for Charles Alsop, the Quaker Lead Company wouldn't have been involved in the North Pennines. We don't know where he came from originally, but he shows up in history in the late 1600s, building a smelt mill at Ryton. And he certainly had help from local Quakers in Newcastle, Quaker merchants who helped to finance the development. And it was located in Ryton, we think, because that's where the coal was, rather than that's where the ore was. The ore had to be brought all the way down from the mines in Alston Moor and Allen Heads down to Ryton to be smelted. But Charles Alsop was a well-known Quaker. There was a quite a large Quaker meeting, which they called Derwentside. We'd probably really call it today sort of Shotley Bridge concert. But that area, there was a concentration of Quakers around that district, and he was one of those. But he was well known both regionally amongst Quakers and nationally, and had good connections with Quakers in London. So he sort of brought together Quakers who were involved in lead mining and lead smelting in North Wales and in Bristol. And it's interesting that they were the principal lead smelters, and they happened to all be Quaker families. So there was a kind of a nexus, and it was brought together by Charles Alsop and by London Quakers. And what London Quakers brought to the table was money, really. They were involved in silversmithing, goldsmithing, and those particular businesses tended to lead into banking. I think it's because if you're dealing with very valuable stuff, people think, well, that's a safe place to keep my money. And it's also, oh, that's somebody I could ask for some money. So they were sort of first off goldsmiths and silversmiths, but they fairly soon got into banking. And so that's where, because when you're developing, when you wake up in the morning and decide you want to be a lead smelter, you need the technical expertise and you need the money. Charles had the technical expertise, and the London Quakers had the money, and so you've got the ingredients that lead to. It's the usual story of the Industrial Revolution, really, isn't it? A combination of technical knowledge, entrepreneurship, and access to people with the money. So Charles built the smelter at Ryton, and then as the London Lead Company developed and got involved in extraction of ore up at Alston Moor, they moved the centre of operations from Ryton to the mill at Whitfield, and that mill already existed. I think it was built by George Bacon, but anyway, the London Lead Company acquired that mill in 1706, and Charles and his family moved from the Derwent Valley to Allendale, and they bought this Broadwood Hall, which had belonged to George Bacon, who wasn't a Quaker, but he sold it to the Alsops, and they, I think, built and improved it. And that Broadwood Hall is almost within sight of the meeting house at Allendale. It's just over the brow of the hill. So very convenient for going to the Quaker meeting, which he undoubtedly would have done with his family. He married into a local Quaker family from Broadley in the West Allen, and it looks like they got married at what we now call Limestone Brae. There was it's no longer a meeting house, but in the 17th and 18th century there was a meeting house there. That's where we think they got married. And their initials, Charles and Lydia, the initials over the door say C and L A. So Charles and Lydia Alsop, 1716. So next slide, please. So I was talking about the London Lead Company. It's quite an interesting example. Most industrial businesses were family run or run by maybe a partnership. London Lead Company was different in that it was set up in the same way that something like the East India Company or the Hudson's Bay Company were. So more similar to a modern limited company with shareholders and directors. But at the time that the London Lead Company was formed, that was an unusual way of organising, and I think it suited the people that founded it because they were quite a large collection of mainly Quakers from different parts of the country, and they needed some business structure that would enable them to work together. So they had to go to a royal charter, and the royal charter it was established by their majesties for the incorporation and incorporating the governor and company for smelting down of lead with pit coal, which is a bit of a mouthful, so it's not surprising it was later on called the London Lead Company. But there's two interesting points about that. One is it says their majesties, which tells you why is that plural. That's because it was William and Mary's reign and they were joint sovereigns, which was quite a peculiar thing. And why is it so explicit about the smelting down of lead with pit coal and sea coal? Charles Alsop, who I just talked about, was one of those who pioneered the smelting of lead ore with coal rather than with charcoal, which had been the traditional way that it was done up to that time. So it was a technological advance, and that's why they wanted a charter, I think, to protect their monopoly of that process. So now I've mentioned already that there were Quaker merchants based in London, and through that business they became bankers. And there's a direct connection between the people who were involved in establishing the London Lead Company and the people who established Barclays Bank. Very much family connections. I think it was it was the son-in-law of one of the. That's right, John Freem, who was a London goldsmith. His brother-in-law was James Barclay, and James Barclay and his family then established Barclays Bank. And the reason why Barclays Bank has got the eagle symbol is that it was founded at the house with the black eagle, the sign of the black eagle. That's where it gets its symbol from. As well as refining, as well as the ore, lead ore, sorry. As you know, silver is often found alongside lead, and when lead is being smelted, silver is a byproduct that has to be separated from the lead. I believe that if the silver and the lead is mixed in with the lead, it weakens the lead product. So it has to be extracted, but obviously, of course, it's a very valuable thing in itself. And that was, you can see, I think, the connection there with the silversmiths and goldsmiths, Quakers in London. Here's a source of valuable silver, which they can deal with, that they can deal in, and the silver that was extracted from the ore in the Alston Moor area, some of it was particularly high quality. And so the Royal Mint was rather interested in using that particular source for the minting of their silver coins. And you can see there above the eagle one of their silver coins. And I was really quite pleased to find that in my wife's family coin collection, her family were Quakers. We found one of those shillings in their collection. Whether they knew that it was what we call a Quaker shilling or not, I don't know. But you can tell these Quaker coins from others because they have the rose and plume symbol. The rose representing the English interests, the mines, mainly the mines up here in the North Pennines, and the Welsh mines, which were around Flintshire. So that's the symbol of the plume. So if you see a coin with those two symbols on it, then that means it's been minted from silver from one of the London Lead Company's mines, and so that silver could indeed be silver from this area. Next slide, please. So some of the Quakers I'm mentioning were directly involved in managing the mining and smelting business, like Charles Alsop. He became the manager for the London Lead Company and their interests in the North Pennines. He was their first on-the-spot manager, because running a company from London, they needed really reliable people who could work pretty much independently. They would send a delegation up probably a few times a year just to see how things were going on, but they really had to, because of the time it takes to communicate and so on, they really had to leave it to the local management to look after their interests and manage the enterprise. But there were also Quakers who were involved either as miners themselves or working in the wider industry. So the Watson family, which were very numerous particularly in the East Allen valleys, they lived at Huntwell, towards the top of the East Allen, and I think they were one of those families where they combined mining with small holdings. So you find them being talked about as farmers, but also clearly they were involved actually in physically working the mines. And there's a branch of the Watson family that moved over towards Newbiggin, the Blanchland mines, and they built a meeting house up above the current village of Blanchland. It's not there now, but it clearly was there in the 1750s, and the only remains today are a burial ground over at Winnow's Hill, which overlooks the Derwent Reservoir. So that was a family that was involved directly in working the mines, and there's a quite well-known Quaker called Joshua Watson, who I think he made an impression because he was described as being very blunt of manner, and probably upset a lot of people. But there was a tradition that the Allendale Quakers were known for being direct of speech. It's sometimes called plain language or plain speaking, and went along with the plain dress. So no airs and graces, and no posh clothes. So keeping things simple. The other interesting Quaker that from that period was Isaac Hall. His mother was widowed very early on and had to make a living from weaving, which is quite common at that time. But Isaac would go from market to market, selling the cloth that his mother had woven across all the market towns, probably down to Penrith, over to Hexham, and so on. And one thing led to another, and he then developed a business as a carrier. So he needed to transport stuff himself, but people would say, "Oh, we'll just take this for us," and eventually, yeah, he got a string of pack horses and was in the carrying business. And then he started contracting for the very valuable trade of carrying the ore from the mines to the smelter. And he must have made a good living for that, because he was able to buy a farm at High Studden towards the top end of the East Allen, and the Hall family lived there for generation after generation and were one of the leading Quaker families. So it's just an interesting way in which the lead mining, you can see it as a whole economy, and involving people not just in mining but in supplying miners and trading, making money from the business. So next slide, please. This is a list of the two lead companies agents who were also Quakers. I've mentioned Charles Alsop. His son-in-law, Abram Watson, was the next London Lead Company agent, and after him, Thomas Westgarth, and finally John Smith. But it's such a common name, I haven't been able to find much more about him. But that's work to be done, I think. Yeah, sorry. I'll go straight on to talking about William Westgarth, Thomas Westgarth's son. So Thomas worked for the London Lead Companies in their interests in Blanchland and that area, and his son William began work also for the London Lead Company in at Nent Head. And the letter on the right there is the Blackett Beaumont Company politely asking the London Lead Company if they can poach one of their staff. So this is a letter from Henry. Henry Robson. Anyway, it doesn't matter who. But it just interesting how they were very politely sort of cooperating, but also competing, and having a good manager who's got the technical knowledge and can make a big contribution was really important. So the two companies were always competing for staff. William Westgarth's probably best known. Next slide, please. For his invention of the hydraulic engine, and one of our other speakers talked a little about the use of water power and how important that has been right through the lead industry in the North Pennines, and how, compared with other areas, and we mentioned Cornwall earlier on, in Cornwall they adopted steam power very early on, Trevithick and so on. But in the North Pennines, they tended to continue with water power and made it at greater sophistication in the use of water power. And William Westgarth was one of those who moved the technology on a step and made a valuable contribution, which was valuable to him as well. He got a prize from the Society of Arts of 50 guinea prize for his work, which would go quite a long way in those days, I should think. And he was an active Quaker, but he was also, and it was quite typical at the time, they were friendly with the growing Methodist movement in the 18th century, and William was so impressed with John Wesley's preaching that to the Derwent miners that he provided a house for him to stay in and invited him to come and work again amongst the miners. The miners tended to be, from that time on, Methodists. The farmers and carriers tended to be Quakers, and there was that. It wasn't so much rivalry; it was more or less, oh, that's your occupation. You're probably a Methodist. My occupation is farming. I'm a Quaker, and so they sort of rubbed along quite friendlily. And I suppose they also had the common enemy of the old Church of England, which I don't know how many people know, but one of the things that early Quakers would not do is to step inside a church, or to get married in church, or to have their children baptized, or to be buried in a churchyard. So very early on, you find Quaker burial sites all the way up and down the east and west Allan valleys and up into Alston Moor, because they couldn't and wouldn't bury their people in Church of England. And the other thing it interfered with, of course, was people getting married. So if you wanted to marry somebody who wasn't a Quaker, you had to either ask them to join Friends, which was okay, but if they weren't willing to do that, then you probably had to stop being a Quaker and get married in church. So you get quite a lot of cases where things go one way or the other. A few people tried to get round it by getting married in Scotland, where you could get married without a priest. So they were legally married, but not by either church. Yes, next slide. So the last person I want to mention is Hugh Lee Pattinson. Now, he came from an Alston Quaker family. His father was a shopkeeper, And it's another instance of Quakers making a living alongside the mining. So the Pattinsons ran a shop that they provided um, drapery, ironmongery, that sort of thing. So the kind of things that working miners would need for day-to-day living. And Thomas was described as of sober-minded people of good repute who sold groceries, drapery, and the requisites for miners. Thomas was buried at the Alston Meeting House, and it says near the door. There's no gravestones at Alston, so we just have to imagine that it was it wasn't the custom then to mark graves. But it's interesting that we know pretty much where he was buried. So his son Hugh began work for the Greenwich Hospital, who, as you probably know, actually owned all the land that the Quaker Lead Company mined. So they licensed the London Lead Company to mine the land that the Greenwich Hospital owned. But they also had some interests of their own in smelting. And one of the things that they were involved in was still the production of silver. And Thomas was their assay master, and probably worked in that building that you can see at Nent Head today, assaying the value of the silver that was being extracted. And the object in the foreground is, I'm told, is the crucible that Pattinson used to refine silver. And he developed, I don't know the technology at all, but he developed a new way of, an improved way of separating lead from silver. And that was pioneered in his work for the Greenwich Hospital. After that, he became manager of some of the Blackett Beaumont lead works. But having invented this process, he then branched out by himself and set up a works on Tyneside, chemical company on Tyneside, and became quite a wealthy man. He didn't stay a Quaker, and that's the reason for that is, as I was mentioning about marriages, he wanted to marry a young lady called Phoebe Walton, who was from a fairly comfortable Anglican family in Alston. And I think the family probably said, yeah, you can marry Phoebe, but we're not going to have any truck with you Quakers. So he had to get baptized, and I'm not quite sure why, but the records say that he got baptized at the Angel Inn in Alston rather than in the church. So it may have been one of those sensibilities that he didn't want, even though he was leaving the Quakers, he didn't want to set foot in the church. So that's one of the cases where the choice was made that he would renounce his faith rather than his wife. And he had a brother, Brother Thomas, who remained a Quaker, and we know that he married a Quaker girl from Allendale and is buried in the Allendale meeting burial ground. So families go different ways, and it's very interesting to trace the ins and outs of these. Yes, next slide, please. What I'm still working on this connection, because it's really interesting that there's such a connection between Quakers and the lead mining industry. And one of the things I'm looking at is this question of, to what extent was the London Lead Company a Quaker company? We know it was originally a Quaker company, and the majority of its investors and directors were Quakers. But as time went on, that got diluted, and so by the end of the company ceased operations just before the 1900. There were very few Quakers actually involved in its management. But as we've seen, some of its managers were Quakers, particularly in the early period. In the later period, it seems that they were not. And we looked at, when we were up at Nent Head, we looked at the Stagg family, for instance, and they were clearly Church of England people. So it looks like the influence of the Quakers died away over the years. But the question really is, to what extent was it Quaker in its ethics, and looking at how the company cared for its workers, built, well, as we were talking about, built the model village at Nent Head, looked after the health of the workers, looked after their education, built all the infrastructure. That looks like something that a company with a Quaker ethic would do. And you look at the Cadbury's, famous Quaker companies like Cadbury's, Fry's, Rowntree's. They were smelting chocolate, not lead, but so that would say, well, yes, it does look like it's a company that behaves like a Quaker company. But then you have to look at what the Blackett Beaumont company were doing, their rivals, working very similar and alongside each other. And they were doing much the same thing. They were looking after their staff in the sense that they were providing housing, education, medical services, and so on. So to get an answer to that, I think we probably need more research. There's an article written by David McAnally, which sort of puts the argument on the other side. So the sort of classic work is Arthur Raystrick's 2 Centuries of Industrial Welfare, and he was a Quaker, and it very clearly comes through in his writing that he was of the opinion that it was a company inspired by Quaker principles. David McAnally puts the contrary view, and I think the debate is still open, really, as to where you come down. I put that picture of the remains of the I guess it's a mine shop up at Clargill, because that's where that very rich seam of silver ore was found. I don't know the technicalities of it, but what I read was that the ore there contained 36 ounces per ton of silver, per ton of ore, compared with the average of about 8 ounces of silver per ton of typical ore. So it was a very rich source, and just nice to think of that silver going into the Royal Mint. And I don't think I mentioned that at the time the Royal Mint was run by Sir Isaac Newton. And he took a very hands-on interest in running it. He was very much wanted to avoid sort of come down hard on counterfeiters, and so he was very interested in that whole business, and probably would have had contact with those London Quakers that were dealing in this very useful product. So it's just a nice link back to sort of a wider history, I suppose. Yeah, so a final slide. There's still Quaker meeting houses in use in this area. The meeting house at Allendale I've mentioned, which was established in 1690. The meeting house at Alston was built in 1732, and a meeting house at Colnwood was built in 1760. The first two of those are still in regular use for Quaker meetings. The third is now a preserved building with a once a year meeting, but it is in the hands of the Historic Chapels Trust, who preserved it, and it stands in its original form as it was built in 1760. So it's a wonderful place to, if you want to get a feel for what a Quaker meeting house looked like when in that original time. Then Colnwood is a wonderful place to see. But there were other meeting houses, as I mentioned, at Limestone Bray and over in Blanchland. And you don't find Quakers in the rest of Northumberland. There's some strong association between the type of people who were living and working in the Allen Valleys and Alston, and there was an attraction, I think, to this particular faith that's quite distinctive, but is also found in Westmoreland and Cumberland and in some of the upper Yorkshire Dales. I think that probably wraps it up.
Fabulous. Thank you, David.